Hello, welcome to the GW Book Club, where me and my good friend Stu have been reading through classic Games Workshop books published over the history of the company. We've been making our way recently through the original 17 books published by the publisher GW Books between 1989 and 1991. These were the first ever stories set in the Warhammer, 40k, and Dark Future universes. We've actually made our way to the final of those original books, Beasts in Velvet by Jack Yeovil. This is a book that I cannot wait to talk about. It is the apotheosis of Jack Yeovil, which is the pen name of Kim Newman. It is the absolute zenith of his work for Games Workshop. It brings together all of the threads of his earliest works and stories, and it is just, it is so stylish. It is so interesting. It is an amazing mystery. It's a great book in its own right. I really, really enjoyed it. So I am looking forward to sharing the discussion about it. If you want to find out even more about this book, you can check out my Patreon, where I've released an annotated post that goes through as many of the references to other bits of Warhammer lore, to other books in the series, and to movies and pop culture as well. That is a post that I really enjoyed making, so you can go and check that out. And if you want to find out more about the other GW books, there's a whole host of videos in the playlist, so give that a look. Before we get to the discussion that Stu and I had about this awesome book, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the story. In the fog-shrouded streets of Altdorf, there is a killer on the loose and revolution in the air. Johann von Mecklenburg, the Elector Count of Sudenland, is concerned that his brother Wolf may be involved in the deaths, given his corruption and redemption from chaos many years earlier. Working with a group of unorthodox detectives, Johann is determined to uncover the truth, even when it appears likely that a member of Emperor Karl Franz's own court may be involved in the murders. The Emperor's confessor from the Church of Sigmar, the Elector Countess Emmanuel, and her brother, the deadly duelist Leos, the Bretonnian and Cathayan ambassadors who have secrets of their own, and many more suspects besides, circle these heinous crimes. While the capital city of Altdorf becomes even more dangerous as a chaos plot to destabilize the Empire turns the tinderbox streets into devastating riots, more bodies are found and the beast becomes ever bolder and more bloody. Stu, we are together again for the GW Book Club. We have been reading some more classic fiction from Games Workshop. This time we have read the 17th, the final, in fact, original GW book. This is Beasts in Velvet by Jack Yeovil, which is the pen name of Kim Newman. We've read loads of Kim Newman stuff so far. A lot of it has been really, really good. And this is kind of, I don't know that it was intended as a big finale, but this is the big finale for GW books. It would return with Box Tree later on. It would return with Black Library. But that original vision, that original plan ends with this book. Did you enjoy it, I suppose, is the place to start.
Yeah, hell yeah. What an ending. What a way to end the... I can't believe it's been 17 months we've been doing this.
I know, yeah.
It's got, whoa, it doesn't feel that long, which is good. But yeah, I think we had good hopes, strong hopes based on previous writing that this was going to be good. And it really, really was. Really enjoyed it, and a really fitting way to sort of finish off, because we know there's a few little things to storyline wise in trilogies that haven't quite been covered in these 17 books that we are going to go back and finish off. But in terms of the 17, what a way to finish. Really good.
Yeah, I agree. I was at one point I was reading this just in a coffee shop, and I just started sort of chuckling to myself as I read it, and then I think I said out loud, "This is Avengers Endgame." Because this book, even though I don't know when Kim Newman knew, if he ever knew whilst he was writing it, that this book was going to be the end of that first experiment. But the way it's written feels like someone who's sort of sat down and they've gone through every book so far and they've said, okay, how can I bring some of these threads together? Not necessarily everything, thankfully, because some of them should not be seen again. But just in terms of okay, there's a cool character, there's a cool idea, there's a setting from something else. How can I sort of weave some of this in and create a shared universe? Something that's been present through some of the GW books, and we've seen some crossovers, especially in Dark Future, but even in the Warhammer Fantasy stuff, there's been some shared characters and some like shared plot points, but nothing to this kind of level. And not only that, it's also just an amazing sort of rip-roaring adventure, at the same time as being a sort of grim and perilous detective story. So
yeah,
I could not get enough of this. I'm going to tip my hand straight away and say, like, I'm not. I don't even know. It's blown my mind to the extent that I came into this knowing for certain that Drachenfels was going to be my favorite book from this run, and now I just don't know. I'm like, oh my gosh, we started and we ended with these incredible bookends from Kim Newman.
Yeah.
Just awesome stuff. Amazing.
Yeah, this is my favorite. This is my favorite.
It's taken
it
the
feels
top
like it's an easier favorite, if that makes
Right.
sense. It's almost like Drachenfels is Alien, and this is Aliens. So it's a little bit more. It's a little bit more mass market in some ways. A little bit of an easier read. There's easier low hanging fruits to draw a wider market of people into it, probably. But I know there's a part of me that says no. You should probably prefer Drachenfels. So it's more of a thinking man, if you can have a thinking man's Warhammer book. But I think I just prefer this. To be honest with you, I think it's great. It's horror. It's detective story. It's Jack the Ripper story. Yes. It's so many layers that are familiar, almost to the point that sometimes you have to remind yourself you're not in Victorian London. There's some real elements to it, but it's also very Warhammer at times as well. You do feel like you're in one of Warhammer's biggest cities. You get that. It feels more familiar than some of the books earlier on in the series that we're still finding their feet in terms of crafting the old world. It's just so good. There's so many characters, so many little nods. Luckily aren't all in it too long. It's just name drops sometimes from different books, not all his characters. And there are so many names and so many characters, maybe too many. If there's going to be one criticism, there are so many different threads and things that build up. It's almost like it worked while reading it, but I suppose now we need to sit down and talk about it, and I'm going through my notes and thinking, oh yeah, that person, I forgot about that person, and this happens at this point. You go, this is a lot. There is a lot in a relatively short book. It's a lot happens. But it's still good.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely part of the Jack Yeovil style, isn't it? To almost stuff these books with loads of stuff and characters, plot points, and I it's obviously a sort of a writer, like his method of writing, because we know he wrote these super quick as well, and it's almost like just pouring out onto the page, and that's probably the reason there's so many references and so many touch points and borrowed plots and other elements. But because of that, I imagine that's made it easier to write quickly, and he does lots of very small sort of mini chapters, and like within a chapter he'll have loads of different sections and jump between characters' perspectives, and they will be discrete. Kind of, okay, now we're with this guy. A page later, we're with someone else. A page later, we're with someone else again.
Sometimes it's 4 or 5 lines as well, isn't it? It's really,
absolutely.
Really
you literally will get a thought or seen something, or like literally going through a door and nothing else. But that also makes it really easy to read, I think, and very accessible. And it gives it a kind of cinematic quality because he's writing in the way that a film is sort of edited and kind of put together, scene after scene after scene, instead of kind of long drawn out. A chapter goes through multiple scenes and conversations. His scenes are literally, just one conversation, and then we move to somewhere else, a new location, a new event, or what have you. So it has a cinematic quality to it, I think, in a good way, for me, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say that a lot about his writing, don't we? Nearly every time we talk about him, we can imagine it on the screen rather than as a sort of a novel that you'd have to abridge. It doesn't feel like you'd need to abridge it. It feels like something you could convert quite easily.
Yeah, I think so.
Into a script. Most of the conversation could be direct text, direct lines in a film, and then some of the description just becomes visual. It's so This would make a good film, wouldn't it? We
This would
talk about
make
that a
a
lot.
great film.
Very
Yeah.
good film. Whether it would feel like a good representation of Warhammer, I don't know, because I think it represents the world well, but
Yeah.
whether it's Warhammer enough to be, if Amazon were going to pick something, I don't think they'd pick this as the first or second or third.
Sure.
It would be something when Warhammer was well and truly settled in people's minds, and you wanted a detective story in a fantasy world. This could be great. But
yeah, I mean, that's a
also,
fair
you
point.
could set this anywhere, couldn't you? You could set this pretty much in any well-known, fantasy city, and it would still work as a story. It's just that good by itself.
I think that's all true. I think there's an interesting question about the sort of Warhammer-ness of it, and we've come across that challenge in a few places through the GW books. I think for me, this is very Warhammery, and I think that is because of Kim Newman's sort of, his desire to name check stuff and reference stuff and bring elements of the known world into it.
Yeah.
But I also think that the tone and the feel of it is very of sort of Warhammer Fantasy roleplay for me. And I think probably the better fiction that we've seen in this series has been the stuff that's resembled Warhammer Fantasy roleplay more than anything resembling Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Largely because, it's probably easier to write that kind of intimate, dark adventure than it is to write an epic, like, war. Yeah. That said, we've seen great fiction when we've looked at, say, the High Elf Armies book that we're doing an episode on. Like, that has epic mythological battles that feel very Warhammer Fantasy Battle at the same time. So it can be done. In a novel, it's a bit harder maybe in some places. But it definitely feels Warhammery to me still. It still has like all of that great grit to it.
Yeah. It's the description of the city is recognizable. But it also just goes to show as well that you spend a little bit of effort making sure that you name drop, making sure that you name places and people and that are realistic at that time, rather than just, I don't know, not that any author would do this, but picking somewhere miles away so that you could do what you want. It's amazing how you could still take essentially the same story, but add those names, and it feels like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay rather than a generic D&D adventure sort of thing. And but as the opposite point of that is, I think you could change those names for well-known names in lots of fantasy, and it would still work. And that's not a bad thing. That's just because it's a good enough story in itself that you could change the location, and the story, 80% of the story still work. You could almost take the story and place it in Victorian London if you wanted, and make and have is there a werewolf? No, it's not. It just turns out to be a murderer kind of thing as well. So it's flexible enough that it can do that, but at the same time, it still feels Warhammer.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Who's taken.
I take that point. I think there's enough care in the way the names are dropped and the characters are introduced and things are thoughtfully tied in. You before earlier said that, okay, is there a danger there's too many? Is there too much sort of name dropping? Are there too many confluences of just people together? I absolutely can understand why someone would feel that way. My justification when I enjoy something like that is almost the hand of fate has put all of these people in one place at the same time. So the reason that there are so many characters we've met before happening to be in Altdorf at this very moment is because they were always supposed to end up there. That's why we read their story in the first place, because it would lead to this point now. Now, obviously, not everyone who we've read and has appeared in previous stories who is mentioned here. You get stuff like Sam Warble, the halfling turns up from Marienburg. Absolutely amazing. I smiled so much when he turned up. It was such a brilliant surprise. It's not like he's there and he is super influential or integral to the plot, but his presence is justified by the end of the book. So it kind of works in a way where, yes, it's gratuitous and it's a name drop and a reference for the sake of it, but also it's then kind of been fit in a way that you can sort of walk away going, oh, okay, yeah, sure, it didn't need to be there, could have been anybody, but it's a bit of fun that he was there and it works.
Oh, it was fine, and it
Yeah,
definitely wasn't at the cost of a new character that wouldn't have added any extra value to it.
sure.
If
Yeah,
anything, it's probably better because it's a name that we recognise. And if you hadn't read those previous books, it wouldn't make any
yeah, you wouldn't
difference
lose anything.
anyway.
Yeah,
So it's good. It was a good use of it rather than crowbarring something in there just for fan service.
yes,
It's good fan service, if that
it
makes
is good
sense.
fan service, right? And I have to mention this because I, throughout this entire series, have taken issue with repeated character names. And how many times have I said, why has this character got the same name? You know, how many Rudies do there have to be across these books, for instance? And amazingly, Kim Newman, you know, 30 years before I would ever be here to read the book, has thought of it as well and justifies it. He actually has a character. He's got a character called Wolf has been in one of his stories, has met the other character called Wolf in one of the from one of the other stories, and they've talked about how they are both called Wolf, and they've talked about the fact that they both have like traits of wolves as well.
Yeah.
And then also he's thrown into the mix Eric the werewolf from the Starboat story way back in Ignorant Armies. Is brilliant. It's just so I chuckled so much in those, like seeing those conversations. It was so good.
I think he probably did while writing it as well. I
Yeah, I
imagine
bet he did. And deservedly so, because it's such good fun.
yeah, yeah. Just lots of little fun things like that throughout.
Yeah.
That, like I said earlier, wouldn't be noticed at all if you just read this as part of the series of Genevieve books. But if you read them more like we have in the last 17 months, then they're extra special little nuggets.
You know what? It really justifies, genuinely, it justifies having done the whole GW book project.
Having read some of those stories.
Yeah, yes, it does. Because, you know, we've read some of those and we were kind of like, oh boy, some of the books, not necessarily the actual full novels, but some of the short stories have been a little bit rough. But we actually get to sit down and kind of go, okay, all of those other short stories, all of those other stories, they led to something. There was kind of an end purpose, even though it wasn't intended that way. I'm guessing it still feels that way. It retroactively justifies so much other stuff in a cool way that I can get on board with it.
Just get the best author to come back and fix some stuff.
Yeah, just you know, just can
by
you make
taking the
sense
Mickey
of
out of it, pretty
Starboat
much.
for us? Yeah,
Yeah.
we haven't actually talked about the full story. I mean, you mentioned before that it is a riff, I suppose, on Jack the Ripper, and that's absolutely true. It is in the fog-bound streets of Altdorf. There are women being attacked on like at night. There is a sort of major police effort to try and track down who this person that is committing these crimes might be. And there's also at the same time a lot of sort of political tension starting to brew. There's some real tensions amongst the different sort of factions in the underclasses and the sort of workers. Some of that having been stoked by a villainous character we've met before. So there is this really interesting kind of set of, it is a bit of a tinderbox that this investigation is happening in, down on the Docklands where most of the tensions are existing. And one of our main characters is Johann von Mecklenburg, who we met in the Ignorant Armies. So in that story, he had gone on a 10-year quest with his loyal retainer Vukotic to try and recover his brother who'd been kidnapped by Chaos Warriors, so his brother Wolf. They managed to find him in like an epic kind of like a eternal battle of chaos, and they rescue him. Vukotic sacrifices himself, and the sacrificial blood anoints Wolf and cures him of his chaos taint. We'd said at the time, oh, that's super interesting. What a fascinating kind of mechanic almost. We've not really seen that anywhere else. Does it really make sense though that someone can just be cured of chaos mutation? And again, Kim Newman, one step ahead, questions it himself in this story. And there's a question about, is Wolf actually cured of his chaos taint, or is he the killer? So you've got Johann von Mecklenburg, who is investigating these crimes, and he brings in a couple of other characters. But he's also worried that it's his own brother who's doing it. So there's quite an interesting dynamic at play there as well. I mean,
Yeah, that works really well.
it does, right? Yeah. Well, how did you feel about the sort of the progression from the start of this detective story?
I think it was done very well. It was interesting to how he decided who was going to be the main investigator, because it clearly wasn't being investigated properly. So bringing in a character we knew very well, been a very different guys. It almost could be a different character in many ways, but time has passed on. He's back in pretty much the royal court now, being a gentleman. So his life is very different, and you had to set him apart as well, and to be more reasonable and less foppish as well, and it kind of it works quite well. So I think that's good. I quite like that he's the one driving the investigation, even though he gets other people to do the majority of the legwork. Yeah, I think it works well. It's a nice link between the two. Well, I'll say two, but the two classes, I suppose. So what's going on at the court, the velvet wearers, and what's going on with the docks, and where most of the murders are happening, the street workers, the women of the night, that are mostly the ones being targeted, and that whole uprising. You've really got this almost pseudo early French Revolution stirrings, a bit kind of Victorian riots in northern city vibe going on as well, haven't you? Sort of Peterloo kind of stuff. Sure. That's kind of all underlying in there as well, and these tensions between workers' rights, and so I think it works really well. I think his level-headedness becomes a nice bridge between effectively the two camps, and enables the story to be told in both parts rather than two linear stories, I think.
Yeah, and I forgot, of course, we've met him since. We saw him in Drachenfels at the very end, wasn't he? He was one of the court of Karl Franz who sort of tried to intervene. He only has a sort of heroic moment, I think, but he doesn't save the day, which is quite nice. So we do get more of his character. He still is quite a heroic character, but he's now taking on his role as an Elector Count. I really liked him, and I think you're right. I think it's a really good way of bridging the two worlds, because we also know he has a relationship with Karl Franz's son, Leopold. He knows all of the nobles, the other Elector Counts, and then he's also quite happy. You know, he obviously spent 10 years out in the field with his retainer, former bounty hunter Vukotic. He's quite happy to be out and about, getting his hands dirty and working with, you know, the detectives who will help him solve the crime. And then because he also is getting other people to solve the crime, it creates the window of sort of doubt about, is he the good, you know, is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? Is he covering up for his brother? Did he do it? You know, there's enough in there for there to just be a question mark. You could have read this book and the surprise twist could have been that he was the killer, because there's enough of that at play as well, I think.
Yeah, there's quite a few paths set up for would-be potential killers, which is you expect in a story like this. They need to be there, but it is done very well.
I think it is.
And it's not. I wouldn't say it's hard to guess what's going to happen or who, but and we won't get to the end yet. But the means of it and the reasons why were a genuine surprise to me. And there was still enough doubt all the way through that it could still be. I know I'm deliberately being pushed this way as this person could be, and Wolf is one of those. We've already hinted at a little bit because of his struggles with maybe the chaos taint that is or isn't there. So you feel like this is the deliberate red herring there. It can't be him. But then you also think, well, with Newman, it could be, because he could just do a switcheroo and it'd be a double. Yeah. So there was enough there all the way through that it could have been a few different people, and lots of different motives and motivations. So lots of very strong characters all the way through.
Loads of strong characters, yeah. I mean, we're introduced to a couple of sort of the detectives, or the team, as it were. We get Rosanna Ophuls, who is not a witch as such, but she can sort of divine she can see the memories of the dead, and she can sort of feel people's thoughts and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff when she touches them. And then Filthy Harold, of course, who is a sort of slightly disgraced former policeman
Yeah,
who was fired because he was sort of incorruptible. So,
yeah,
and he's been a sort of sewer jack, or he's sort of working the sewers now. That's why he's Filthy Harold. And then he's brought back. So Johan gets him his badge back, and then he's just
yeah.
no nonsense whatsoever. And yes, okay, yes, it is a Dirty Harry riff, a very brazen Dirty Harry riff. But even despite that, even with that potentially immersion breaking sort of, just really lampshading this reference, I personally loved it. I thought Filthy Harold as
Yeah,
a
it didn't
character
matter.
was brilliant. He's so well drawn and he works so well in this world, and his role in this story is just so effective. He is not the lead, but I wanted to spend time with him
Hmm.
because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading about him and sort of seeing what he did. We don't actually get that much of him really in the novel,
No, no, very little.
but he is memorable.
Um, yes, yeah, he is. I think that maybe that's why the Dirty Harry connection doesn't become a problem because it's
Yeah.
fun, and Warhammer needs fun and has humor in it, and that it works, and that's very much part of the old world as a setting, isn't it? That the humor is there, less and less so maybe now, but so I think it's fine. I don't think it detracted. I think it was just another like that's good fun. Let's crack on with it kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think so. Obviously, Drachenfels had a lot of. It is a very aware novel, and
Hmm.
whether that's from it's drawing on lots of different tropes. I think we know Kim Newman, who is a lifelong film critic and film fan. We know it's drawing on movies and pop culture. It kind of didn't do it quite as brazenly as we would see in the Dark Future novels, where he was
Yeah.
really let loose. Just the very nature of that setting almost demanded that you kind of go, okay, how can we get Elvis in this? And then what's great, I think, is that this novel, and I assume this novel was written after the Dark Future ones. I don't know for sure, but I assume so because there is almost like he's stepped it up from Drachenfels, which in retrospect, having read this book, seems like very restrained in how it
Hmm.
uses references and how it sort of uses those kinds of cinematic illusions and all that sort of stuff. And by the time we get here, he's just willing to really to do stuff like there's a character called Filthy Harold, and there's loads of this. There's loads of like directors' names have been used for character names, and there's just loads of references. The final reveal, and when we get to it, we'll talk about it. I think that there's like huge references to movies and stuff in that. I really like how that works in the Warhammer world. I mean, you mentioned that there's a sense of humor to Warhammer that's been there since the start. It's very clear that Rick Priestley and Richard Halliwell and Brian Ansell they loved all that sort of stuff. And there are silly puns, and some of them have thankfully been removed, and some of them are much missed. But
Hmm.
this is a novel that really embraces that and finds a way to bring that into like a story that works as literature, I think.
Yeah, and it as much as that, you'd be forgiven of listening to us now and think that this is a book full of gags and
Yeah.
and frivolity. It's actually not. It doesn't read that way at
No, it
all.
doesn't.
It's it's grim, but not too dark. It's dark around in a way that a horror film
Yeah.
has a vibe to it, but it's not dark in the kind of oh my god, that's just awful. I feel like I need to go and watch some comedy kind of thing. So yeah, the fun is there, but it just doesn't derail the story. I don't think it doesn't derail the feeling and the vibe of the story at all.
Yeah, I agree actually. Because yeah, you're right. It would be easy to sort of take all of this that we're saying and think it's just a pastiche and it's just a sketch show. But it's not. It is a very strong story. It's a proper narrative. The characters are really compelling, and there is such a propulsive forward motion to the story. You have this, the tensions that are happening, the sort of political climate in Altdorf, capital of the Empire, where we do have this noble class that are a bit out of touch, and there are a lot of put upon workers and a lot of put upon people who are struggling. And that is being stoked by Tzeentchian forces, but
Yeah.
also there are legitimate issues that they are capitalizing on, which I think is very smart because you get to both have a chaos Tzeentchian demon bad guy, but
Yeah.
also their plan only works because they are using real problems. So they're actually exploiting something that is there anyway,
Yeah.
which I think is
Yeah.
great. And then you have all of this. This ratchets up, and the tension starts to build and build and build because you've got the natural timeline of there are victims being found, or women being killed on the docks, and they maybe are getting they're a bit happening more frequently. There's less time between them, so there's that natural timeline there. But as the novel is progressing and the case is unraveling and sort of being discovered, you've also then got the political climate bubbling and then boiling over. And then you get to a place of actually things get really serious at one point where there's a riot across Altdorf and all hell breaks loose, basically.
Yes. Yeah. It's these things don't need to be connected, but because they're happening at the same time, they all feed into each other, and it makes things a little. These murders would have been happening anyway, but because they're happening at a time of heightened tension, it just makes them even more important that they are seen to be dealt with. And you can see that in the motivations of some of the wealthier characters who are just trying to pin it on someone so they can close it down and tell the people that we've solved this problem. I mean, it seems idiotic because clearly the murders would just continue. But it is very interesting, like you said. So it's Yefimovich, isn't it? The rabble rousing sort of voice of the people, who's also a servant of Tzeentch. And that's such an interesting, almost dual character, because he would work just as a rabble rouser and as someone politically motivated by class. But the fact that he's using, like you just said, using real people's emotions and unhappiness of society as a way of creating a conflict within the empire, rather than almost using chaos devotion. It's a completely different way of showing chaos. There's no cult there. It really is. It's rather than the cult is class.
Yeah.
It's not using. It's very different. Maybe it's the only way that's been shown in any of the books that we've seen. Is that kind of chaos cult in every corner of an old world city. But yes, there's a couple of key chaos cultists, and there's other characters linked to him, and you find out more about that wider network. But the reality is just about disabling the empire and its politics.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is not through mutation. It's not through getting people to worship their gods. It's just to whip them up into a frenzy and try to get them to storm the royal palace. Really, it's really unusual.
It's great. Yeah, I think it's great. And I think that's one of the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay elements that sort of it draws. We know about the kind of corruption of the nobility, whether that is just because they are selfish and they will exploit people, or because they are followers of chaos. So there is this sort of inbuilt tension to the Empire because of those class distinctions. I love it because you get to use it and it gets to cause that you can explore that idea. You can have a villain who is, at one point, literally his face peels off and he's got a burning demon face. So he is properly like a classic, I don't want to say pantomime villain, but he's an over the top. He's a comic book villain. So he's the Red Skull.
Yeah.
So you get to have that, but at the same time, it does not undermine all of the other stuff, because he is explicitly taking advantage of real problems. And I this might blow some people's minds. It's very clever, but the beasts in Velvet, I mean, it's plural for a reason, because the beast that we're talking about isn't the serial killer. They are a beast, and that is explored. But the beasts in velvet are the nobility. They're the elector counts. They're the members of Karl Franz's court who wear green velvet. They're the bad guys, right? They're because of what they are allowing to happen. You talked before about no one's really trying to solve the actual crime. They just want to brush it under the carpet. At one point, a piece of evidence turns up that is some torn green velvet, immediately dispensed with by one of the corrupt officers, because it's not worth the trouble of actually investigating whether or not it is a noble, because that's just, that's not going to fly. That's never going to, you're not going to solve the problem by taking it to the court. It's a damning indictment of the Empire, and it's also part of the, again, you talk about the Woof-Rupp fantasy battle divide. Karl Franz is a great example of the difference between those two versions of the Warhammer world, where in Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, he is, he's not a great emperor necessarily, and bad stuff happens to him, and maybe he's not even the emperor anymore, after certain adventures and certain scenarios, compared to at least 4th edition onwards in the Fantasy Battle game, where Karl Franz is like all that is good and noble about humanity in the Empire.
True, but maybe it's just through the different lens, isn't it? Because through the battle game, you're never exploring what Karl Franz is like when he's talking about taxation, or when he's talking about sewerage in Altdorf, or farming issues in the highlands, or any of those other normal everyday political things. You're seeing him as Karl Franz, the hero, aren't you? And I can imagine a world where both of those things are true, where they, at a time of war and great danger, people aren't worrying about those things because they're more worried about a chaos invasion, or a vampire counts invasion or something, or orc invasion. Then they just want their mighty hero to save them on the battlefield. But at times of not war, we don't know what he's really like. And I suppose in more modern novels, he's always talking about war. We don't hear the
it's all the battle
politics and machinations. So he gets to be, and if we use a modern term, but he almost gets to be the populist leader of war, doesn't he, in the battle game? But when we come to the realities of running an empire, you can see him through a different lens. But I can imagine a world where both things could be true, and I imagine that was quite an interesting.
You can certainly reconcile it. Yeah, I think that's fair. There is a way for both to exist, to an extent, depending on certain events in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Certainly, the original Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay.
Yeah,
but you kind of I think you're right. They can both exist, and they can be totally context dependent. But I think the nature of just the general presentation of the Empire in one versus the other tends to lean towards, oh, you know what, state troops are great guys in the battle game. In the role playing game, they might be, not so great guys. They might look the other way. They might not be doing their jobs. They might be like whatever, because the cities of the Empire aren't paying them very well, and whatever else. So you kind of have these slightly different viewpoints, and I think we get in the book this darker side, the more corrupt version of the Empire, the one where people are not happy and there is despair and chaos has infiltrated it, like you say, both through the mutation and through the cults, also just through a general sort of, maybe chaos with a small c as well, because it's just, there's bad things happening across these cities and across this empire.
Yes, yeah, and what they were doing was enough.
Yeah. But we get, I think, some of the fun, there's a builds up to, probably some of the more risque stuff as well. So there's a Bretonnian diplomat who's been sent. He is a dwarf, but he was actually a sort of prisoner who was then adopted by a Bretonnian family. This is, again, it's the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay version of Bretonnia that's maybe a little bit more. It's King Charles III who is in charge, and it's more a sort of corrupt nation, more like a sort of France, pre-revolutionary France, I think, than the Arthurian kind of legendary stuff. But the king has sent this dwarf ambassador to insult Karl Franz because he doesn't represent Bretonnia very well. And this guy is kind of obsessed with dancers of an exotic variety.
Buxom.
Yes, indeed, yes. And he decides to have like he's basically working with Dian Ching, the ambassador from
Yep.
Cathay, who we have met before, of course, in Red
Hmm.
Thirst, and we've also yet met Yefimowicz in Red Thirst as well. They were working together in the shadows in that to again foment a
Yes.
sort of rebellion in Zufbar. This
Yeah.
is a number of years later. I forget how many years later, 10 maybe years after that event. But what Dian Ching is trying to do with the Bretonian ambassador is to convince everybody to go on a massive expedition into the Darklands
Yeah.
for seemingly no reason at all. But I imagine just to weaken all of them and just to get their armies out of the way. So you kind of got this cool little bit of political stuff happening
Yeah,
in
I
the
got the
background
impression
as
they were
well.
probably led out there to be ambushed or
Must
something.
be,
They
yeah, right.
wanted some of
Stuff like that.
the elector counts to go and the emperor maybe to go as well. And it's a way of
Like a
luring
big,
them. And
yeah, big
yeah,
crusade essentially into the Darklands.
yeah,
But yeah, we get the Comte de la Rugière, who is the Bretonian ambassador, decides that the best place to have this sort of political meeting with elector counts and with ambassadors and stuff like that is like a dockside tavern, which it is ridiculous. It is a bad decision. It sort of doesn't make sense. But also because this guy he's corrupted through his own sort of his sins and his obsessions. That's why he thinks it's a good idea, and he thinks people are going to be impressed by the dancer that he's acquired and has set up. So you have this unlikely collection of nobles and aristocrats in the Dockside Tavern at the very moment that the riots start. So you
yeah,
kind of create this, it's this outlandish situation, but it puts all of the main characters into one place for all of this big event without it being a riot makes it into the palace or something. So I
yes,
thought that was really
yeah.
inventive and worked really well. And then there were loads of interesting dynamics in that sort of sequence of events.
Yeah, it was unusual. I did think it was unusual that it was in the tavern, but I suppose it brought them to that locality. It was a little bit like this, like take the king to Spearmint Rhino. It's kind of it's not, it is a little bit
Yeah,
strange, but the nature of the character, people kind of went along with it. Is like, we don't really want to go to this but we we've kind of got to because it's the ambassadors do. You think you have his own residence or something, wouldn't you? Yeah, I think it worked because it placed people in the right locale, which brought the kind of the culmination of events at the end. Otherwise, it maybe would have been too much of a stretch to see the peasants kind of breaking down the gates of the palace with all the soldiers would have been there. It would have seemed a little bit different, wouldn't it? So
yeah,
I think it was fun. I
it
think it
was
was good
fun.
fun.
It was.
So it
Yeah.
worked in that sense.
And it made them all vulnerable because you had Prince Leopold there as well. And I guess it was supposed to be a clandestine meeting to arrange this to gain support for this ridiculous crusade. So yeah, you've got all of these main characters in this place. The riot kicks off, and then you have like a whole sequence of events that plays out that was really really cool. Because this is getting towards the end of the novel when sort of the investigation has yielded a number of clues, and we've got some sort of really cool stuff going on. We get a main character we not talked about, one of the sort of young detective whose name escapes me right now. I don't know if you've got the note, you
Um,
noted it down
Let me see. I
because
might
this
have it
was
here somewhere, but I have them in order as they turned up, so I need to scroll down a little bit, which is making fantastic viewing. Um,
it's the only name I think I didn't write down.
is it? Oh, I might have typed it wrong as well. Elisea or something like that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
because it's a little bit of an awkward name to
Yes.
to, to say, but yeah, the
I
young
see what you did
detective.
there. You just
I
didn't want
didn't
to say
say
it wrong.
it. The young detective who has sort of joined the team has been quite on the ball, has been
Mhm.
working with Johan, has been working with Filthy Harold and
Principled,
Rosanna. Very
educated,
principled,
principled.
yes,
Yeah.
but also like taking a bit of a gamble. Didn't need to be in the sort of dock watch, but
Yeah.
has decided to be there because this is a case that could sort of make their career, or they've got some sort of vested interest.
Mhm.
That obviously has dire consequences for them, and they're
Yeah.
killed by the beast and then they're shoved into a barrel in the back of the tavern whilst all of the riots happening, everything's going off. And there's the kind of great moment where like Prince Leopold is missing and Wolf is missing. There's a lot of potential. It's quite well arranged, I suppose, by Kim Newman.
Mhm.
I was genuinely thinking, what is it? Is it Prince Leopold? Could it be? Could he do something as bold as that and have the
Yeah,
Emperor's
I thought
son?
that for a moment as
And
well. Yeah.
I think that is well done because it's absolutely possible that it could have been. And as much as it could have been Wolf, it keeps Wolf in the mix, and there's a couple of other characters as well. It's just a really good, it's like a good Christie novel where just you
Mhm.
get the right arrangement of characters in the right places with the right number of clues in order to make anything is possible and
Yes.
reasonable. And I think
So
you
many
do.
characters were set up, weren't they? So
Yeah,
many are set
yeah,
up.
yeah.
So even Yefimовich at one point. So there's
Yes,
I can't remember her name. Is it Ulrika or
it's
Ulrike?
Ulrika. Yeah, yeah,
So she was essentially a beautiful female rabble rouser, but a kind of a belle of the poor people who loved her, and he took her aside basically and killed her, and then killed her in a way that made it look like the beast had done it, and then showed her body to whip up
yeah,
the it probably led to the culmination of the riots and the storming because
yeah,
people were so angry that she had been killed. But up until that point, there were hints that well, maybe it's him that's been doing it, and because of the way he cussed, you think, well, maybe it could have been him. We haven't talked so much about Wolf as well,
sure.
because he's a student there, but still struggling a little bit. He's an addict,
Hmm.
he's a weird root addict, and he's clearly affecting his life. He's not studying properly, but he has a girlfriend called Trudy who end up being one of the victims of the beast as well, to the
Hmm.
point where he doesn't know whether he's done it. He can't remember because he's basically so smacked out of his face half
Yeah,
of the
completely.
time.
Yeah,
And there's so many of these little avenues of potential people that you think, well, who is it? And you think, well, I don't want it to be Wolf, but that would be the most obvious thing. And a brother has to confront brother about it,
yeah,
and there's lots of that. So it's done so well. But yes, even I suspected Leopold as well at one point. I thought it's going to be him, isn't it? Well, you got all these obvious ones. It's going to be the sweet boy you quite enjoyed watching the buxom lady as well.
yeah. Because it's possible, but we also get at that same event you've got the Elector Countess of Wissenland, so
Hmm.
Emmanuel von Leibowitz and her brother, the great duelist Leos. I'm not sure how to
Hmm.
pronounce it, Leo. But there's loads of characters in the mix in that event. They're
Hmm.
all and again, we said it before, but they're all really strong characters. They're all really well drawn characters. Some of them are fun. Some of them are great. Like just fun to spend time with. I think Filthy Harold even turns up at that, and so does Rosanna. So everyone's there because that's when Yefimowitsch gets revealed as being this kind of demonic being,
Yes.
and then that kind of punctures the riots because people, like a lot of people who had been whipped up by him and thought he was a good guy, then realize he's actually like a demon guy. So it kind of puts the whole riot stuff on ice, but
Yeah.
not before it's caused a
People are
load
like,
of trouble.
oh, yeah, I didn't mean to be here,
Yeah,
actually. I forgot
actually, does it
to
turn out
do.
we've aligned ourselves with
No, not
a
with him at all, actually.
evil demon guy? Yeah, yeah, not a great situation for some people there. But there's also like during the riots, Dian Ching is just sat drinking tea and just sort of
Yeah.
enjoying it because obviously he's like been manipulating stuff and he's a bad guy.
He
Uh,
does kung fu a few
I think he
rabble
does. You're
rousers at
right.
one point,
Yeah,
doesn't he?
yeah, he does. And there's also like a good, cool reveals on him where he had actually killed the real ambassador and taken his place.
Yes. Yeah,
So
this is
you
brilliant.
kind of explain away how he ended up to being in the capital as the ambassador for Cathay.
And
So
I love
yeah,
that.
it's great.
As a sub story, I really, really enjoyed that. Um,
Yeah,
The fact
Yeah,
that he's there and the Empire just think he's a proper Cathayan ambassador. And as far as Cathay are aware, they're ambassador. I mean, this is such a vast world, and there's obviously no modern communication, so these things could go on for years. And I think it's brilliant. It's a really nice touch.
it is.
It just
Yeah,
adds a little bit more depth and expands the politics, and makes them feel realistic in some ways.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
good.
And I also quite like that at the end of the novel, characters like Dianching and Yefimovich are sort of still on the table. They're still available for
Yeah.
use in future novels. We know that Kim Newman had planned to do a bad guys team up novel called
Yeah.
The Invisible Empire that was going to be all about Yefimovich and Dianching and potentially even Drachenfels. He said, he was considering having all of his best villains come together for like one final villainous outing. Man, I would love to have read that book because that would have been something really special based on just what we see from these characters here. They're just great. They're really good
They're
villains.
all there. I mean, even De La Rougier was just
Yes,
survives the end. He had to get sent back in disgrace. There'll be
yes, he did. He did. Yeah.
no more dues at the ambassador's residence.
Yeah.
No trays of Ferrero Rocher at his parties. But yeah, there is a lot that could be done with some of these characters.
Yeah, for sure. And then you get so we talked about Alessier was put into the barrel and was killed by the beast during that event. It's actually a really poignantly done scene because you're obviously seeing it from his perspective, and there's kind of a hope within him that he might survive this,
Hmm.
even though he's been wounded, he's been put into this barrel, and there's also like a gag because his I think it's the his landlady would always tell him that you'll die of a cold or you'll die of this, you'll die of that if you go out in the fog, and then there's kind of that's the button to the end of it, you'll die in the barrel. But then when they find him later on, which I actually thought was a really tense sequence as well, where they so Rosanna, who can sort of divine stuff and see things, can speak to the dead. They go into the storeroom where the barrels are, and then they find him, and they reveal that he'd actually written something on the underside of the barrel lid,
Yeah.
in his own blood, and kind of put a little clue on there, and it's a string of numbers they think, and that's why they then are trying to solve what this clue could possibly mean, because obviously Alessia had seen the beast, knows who it is, and has
Yeah.
written down something to try and help them work it out. So that's a great additional clue, a very sad sort of moment in the investigation. And then we get to there's a number of other sort of interactions and dynamics and stuff like that, but we ultimately get to a big reveal where I actually just thinking there's a great sequence before that where there had been Johann von Mecklenburg waiting for the Countess Emmanuel and Leos von Leibowitz, the duelist, because we'd seen the duelist like killing a load of people, having a load of duels throughout the book.
His prowess as a duelist and a fighter
Unrivaled.
was sort of brought up a few times, teaching Leopold at some point sword fighting.
Yeah.
An actual duel, where he was. That was probably the darkest part of the whole thing, when the way he won the duel and how he tormented the poor loser of the duel and the person who they seconded, or the other way around. But that was a little bit brutal.
Quite bloody,
very good as well.
Quite bloodthirsty, yeah.
I didn't expect that. So that's slowly been brought up a few times about how sort of potent he was as a duelist and a warrior.
Yeah, and they're waiting for the carriage in the fog, and then you just get the young detective who'd been sent to try and find von Mecklenburg. Like it has to find them in the fog, and there's just this quite tense sequence. I just thought it was really effective, where you kind of because at that point in the story you don't trust anyone. You don't trust Johann because it now seems like maybe he's sort of in on it. Maybe he's responsible. You don't trust. There's a dangerous duelist. There are all of these different agitators, and there's people out in the fog and in the city. So there's a real sense of like danger, and obviously the young detective, survives that scene and then ends up dying in the barrel later on. So it's quite sad as a sort of twist of fate, I think, for that character. But they actually work out that the clue is pointing them to Leo, the duelist.
Yeah.
And that is where we then get to the sort of climactic events. We go to the private residences of the Elector Countess, Emmanuel, where she's with her brother. And you get the sort of final reveal, and that the beast is actually Leo, the duelist. And not only that, but that Leo is actually Manuel's sister, not her brother. So when she was younger, she's been forced to dress as a boy because Emmanuel didn't want the rival in the household. And then there's been this real conflict within her throughout her entire life. And then that has sort of manifested, whether through chaotic manipulations or just the sort of general, like whatever has caused it, it has led her to a place where she has been killing people in the city. I mean, I thought that as a reveal, as a sort of twist, it was everything a twist is supposed to be. It was surprising, but also inevitable. It works really well within the structure of the story. It's a great reveal. It's a super tense sequence of events. And you get to this place of like, oh, wow, what's going to happen next? Because there's almost like reveal on top of reveal. And it's this person. No, it's not. It's this person. So you kind of sort of finally get to that place where the reveal happens. And yeah, it's great. I mean, how did you feel about that sort of sequence of events?
It was good. I mean, yeah, he was on one of my list of 5 people that it possibly could be, and that's how well it was done. It wasn't. I think I thought it probably is, and then right towards the end, you think it's Emmanuel's going to be the Countess, and you think, oh, it's the Countess, but hang on, that's quite different to later lore. So my brain was thinking about, well, we know who she is, and that's a bit weird, actually. But yeah, the twist at the end is that there's someone else there in women's clothing, and then has almost accidentally that they realise that she's a woman underneath because of I think the shirt pulls open and things that shouldn't be on a man or often on a man are exposed, and a knife was thrown, and it was this all happened quite quickly. I thought it was really well done, and a complete surprise. That part of it was a really good twist, and I suppose that adds some strength to the story, because if it's just a whodunit and it's one of the 5 people that could have done it, it's like, okay, that's relatively satisfying. But to have a real strong underlying, almost, I don't know if motive's the right word, but reason why Leos was acting the way she was. And I think that was a really strong and pleasing ending to the story, because I always worry about stories like that, is that they are a little bit anticlimactic sometimes, because the fun of them is the build up. And so often those kind of stories, there isn't a real twist. It's you can work out who it's going to be, but to add an extra narrative element to it and the reasoning why they were acting the way they were, far beyond anything I would have dreamed of or expected, I think it made the story even stronger.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it does work within the context of the story. I think it works within the context of the sort of parallels to Drachenfels as well. Obviously that is something of a horror detective novel as well, and although it progresses in a very different way, you do get a reveal in the final act of actually the hero. The good guy turned out to actually be the villain in that. It's not the same reveal here. It sort of takes things in a different direction. I don't think, just speaking for myself, I'm not sure I'm the most qualified person to sort of delve into some of the more delicate aspects of that from a representational perspective and some of that kind of stuff. I think what I do think is well done here is that it is, I think, quite sensitively handled. You have a character whose background is explored, and we do get like flashbacks that drill into what had happened to Leos's, to her through her life, that has sort of driven her to this. And she's quite a sympathetic character by the end, even though she's done monstrous things that, unforgivable things through the course of the novel. It doesn't sort of, and this is a world that actually has demons in it, but I don't think it demonizes her for those aspects of like who she is, it obviously is what she's done that is the problem. Those
Yeah.
things are linked, and there's a lot of complex psychological elements to that.
Yeah, it's trauma, it's mental illness, it's
Absolutely.
psychological damage, and that are the motivators of the crime. Not
Yeah.
nothing fantastical at all.
No, and I think the
Um,
book is puts that on the table. I think what
mm,
Newman does is he's not forgiving what this character has done, but is willing to explore a lot of that stuff. And I think actually on a going back and reading again, there may be more stuff in there to explore in that space.
I think so.
So yeah, I think that even in a, I would personally say, even in a modern context, there is still a lot to this reveal that works and that makes sense and is sensitively handled enough to
Mhm.
not be just sort of a
Yeah,
reductive kind of reveal. That said, I can only assume, I would imagine that Kim Newman, again, from as a cinephile that he is, it reminded me quite a lot of sort of classic Brian De Palma movies, where there's a lot of this kind of reveal taking place in a final act in a serial killer story. That's
hmm
something De Palma has done and sort of loves. I am a big fan of De Palma's work. I think there is a sort of schlocky and sometimes an exploitative aspect to that work that is present here as well. But I think
hmm
what we see here in this book is it does at least try and explore things a lot more. So yeah,
mm.
I think it worked. I think it was really good. I think it was a good reveal, and within the context, it was effective both for the story and for the characters as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, but then we get, we have a bit of a bit of an epilogue that kind of explores some of the characters and what some of them might go on to do. Filthy Harold is reinstated, for instance. Not as much of an epilogue as we got with Drachenfels, where I
Yeah,
think I loved it at the time, but like every single character had like, and then this character did this, and this character did this, and this character did this, and of course in Drachenfels, I think it suggests that Detlef Sierck and the vampire Genevieve sort of live happily
mhm.
ever after. In this book, they briefly appear, more than a
Yes,
cameo, and maybe an extended cameo. We get
yes,
we get a few appearances, and we see there's a bit of trouble in paradise between the
yeah,
two of them there. So
yeah. That kind of reality of how their relationship can only
yeah,
last as long as his virality and health, I
yeah,
suppose.
because he's aging, and especially in a
Mm,
time when I was going to say in a time when obviously Warhammer Fantasy is not an actual historical period, but in a sort of setting in a world where I suspect the average lifespan was not that long.
yeah,
He's in his getting to his 40s. He's in the sort of upper end of probably most Empire lives. Genevieve still looks 16 or so after being
yeah,
600 years old. She's not aged a day, and
yeah.
there's obviously that difference is starting to become more and more apparent, and it's sort
And
of
from a societal point as well, that was noted, wasn't it? That more and more she was being mistaken for
yes,
his daughter, which I think is a sensible nod to make to it as well.
yeah,
I
I would
think
say
it
so. Yeah.
shuts down there. We're aware of this. We're not being weird with this. This is the story. She's a vampire kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think it was good. It was worth having there because we questioned that, didn't we? The
I
first
mean,
time I was like, yeah, because she's supposed to be 16. Okay, why not
yeah,
make her
yeah,
21?
yeah, yeah. And I think he
Um,
said, I think Newman, even when we spoke, he in the interview that I did with him, he spoke about like that was one regret. Actually, he probably would have made her older in retrospect.
yeah,
Like she could have been 18 forever.
yeah,
Yeah, maybe that would have been made a bit more sense. Um, but yeah, I think that was really interesting to see those characters and knowing that we will see at least Genevieve again because there was another intended book that was supposed to come out during the GW books period. It came out during the box tree, the subsequent box tree period. So that's the Genevieve Undead collection, which is
yes.
actually 3 short stories or novellas. So we'll see more of Genevieve. I assume we'll see what happens with her relationship with Detlef. But yeah, that was really nice. And there's, we did, like I say, we get the Sam Warble sort of end where it turns out that Sam, who initially had appeared as just, oh, he was on a ferry, like managing the unloading of a ferry from Marienburg, but he had actually been hired to do some investigation himself,
Yes.
because it was around why Leos had rejected a noble, like a countess, and she wanted to know why. So he was trying to get close and trying to sort of uncover some of that. So even that like neat cameo is kind of justified and is really fun. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of that that's really nice where we kind of get this satisfying ending both to the story, but a load of different characters get little sort of farewells as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just fun, isn't it? Fun
Mm.
and simple, but doesn't really add anything to the story, but it also doesn't detract in a way. It's just good for those people who have read all of those stories.
Yeah,
It's nice little nods.
yeah, the cherry on top, I think. Yeah,
Hmm, yeah.
but yeah, I would say overall, I was really satisfied with it. I was reading this and I was super compelled to read it. I couldn't wait to turn the page and read the next chapter. At the same time, being conscious that this was the final novel, well, not technically, but in the original GW books, this is the 17th book. This is the final GW book. So I was also like, I don't really want it to end.
Yeah, I could see that. I I don't know. I don't think I felt of it that way just because I know that we've got more we're going to cover and I know
Mm.
what comes after. I imagine reading it at the time, if you thought, oh, there's nothing else coming now, or we don't know when the next thing is coming, that would have been sad, definitely,
Mm.
especially if you had enjoyed many of those characters. But I think in hindsight, I didn't think I felt that in the same way.
There's only a few Kim Newman books left to go, though.
Yeah, I suppose in that context, yes, yeah, in terms of his writing for Warhammer,
Yeah.
but
I'm very grateful that we've still got the Genevieve Undead. We've got Route 666, the sort of
mhm,
expanded, what was a short story expanded into a full length novel. And then there's Silver Nails as well, which is
yeah,
all of his short stories, but it's just got a couple of unpublished or additional tales as well. So there's just a couple of slivers of Kim Newman left to go, which is exciting to have left on this big high from the GW
mm,
books. He didn't start it necessarily because his is not the first story in Ignorant Armies, but his novel was the first novel with Drachenfels, which was such a high, such a revelation for me to end on this book, which again is just another like I was worried, how are you going to match Drachenfels? How are you going to get to that level? And he did, and it was so satisfying, just really,
yeah,
really good. It really makes the whole it like obviously, it's not that it justifies the reading of all the books, but it just is a really nice way to end this run of
yeah,
the 17 books because it's a high to start and a high to end.
yeah. And at least we didn't end with Conrad or something like that. That would have
Right.
been a bit of
Exactly. Exactly that. Yeah. Orfeo gets a call out. Conrad gets a
yeah.
call out. Interestingly, the Conrad sort of references, they do suggest the sort of tale of Conrad has completed. So I don't know whether
Mm,
there was a change in publishing order in the original run, but you kind of get the suggestion that Conrad's epic adventure has come to a close, and now he's like a sort of a local legend.
yeah, and maybe it was just that kind of building it into the narrative that he would have been a known hero,
Mm,
and written around the time where it would have been assumed that that story arc would have ended.
yeah.
Maybe the time it was written. Did he know it was going to be the last book? I don't suppose he did he?
I don't know for sure. I guess,
So he would have probably just expected that Conrad trilogy would have been ended or would have been part of this.
yeah,
And if it's the zeitgeist of the old world that they were writing together,
yeah.
that story would have been known to the general public as a great hero. The fact that
Yeah, it's
we
true.
don't know because it wasn't finished at that time is by the by, I
Yeah,
suppose.
and you know what else? It will be a product of. So when you look at the timeline that they published for all of the GW books,
Oh yes,
the
yeah.
Kim Newman stories are all of the final ones, the very, very last ones, which of course is because he has a 10-year time jump within his own stories.
Hmm. Yeah,
You have from Ignorant Armies, it's then 10 years to I guess the end of Drachenfels, which itself
right.
started 25 years earlier, because that's how Johann von Mecklenburg gets to be at Karl Franz's
Yes,
coronation.
yeah.
So you've kind of got a lot of different timelines. Red Thirst, which featured Genevieve and Vukotic as well, takes place even before Ignorant Armies because it's a young Vukotic. So there's a lot of different timelines floating about, I think, in the Kim Newman ones. So if his are all taking place 10 years after everyone else's, Conrad would have been a known entity to people.
True, yeah.
And Orfeo, yeah, just a note of Orfeo the Bard or the Minstrel, which I thought was fun. Yeah. So I think, I mean, any sort of final thoughts, Stu, about Beasts in Velvet?
No, I think it exceeded my expectations. I thought it'd be good, and I didn't think it would be better than Drachenfels. The fact that it is, even with the caveats I said along the lines of that, it's a bit more. It feels obviously better in a more of a commercial way, if that even makes sense. But it makes sense in my head anyway. It was my favourite by far. And it was lovely to end with it. So it exceeded my expectations in that sense.
Yeah, it's great. So it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Massive thumbs up.
Yeah. I mean, I'm giving it a massive thumbs up as well. I think this is absolutely brilliant. I think Kim Newman for me has just been such a discovery. I'd not read any Kim Newman fiction. I'd read some of his reviews in Empire over the years and watched him on stuff. So he was known to me as a sort of film critic. To have read his fantasy fiction now and his sci-fi fiction with Dark Future, I'm now just a true fan. Like I'm so excited to read some of his other fiction. I will be sad as well because I love the fact that not only is he writing great fiction, he's writing great Warhammer fiction and great Dark Future fiction. Like that adds something more to me. So will I read his non-GW fiction and not enjoy it quite as much? I don't know yet. But I love his style, I love his approach, and I love what he brings into the Warhammer world. So yeah, just it's really coloured and sort of informed my view of Warhammer and kind of changed it a fair amount in a way that I'm really happy and excited about. So I think it's been brilliant to read the Kim Newman stuff. I think it's just been great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree at all. Really good.
So I would highly recommend this. I would say that anybody with any interest reading just fiction set in the Warhammer world, that sure, it can be a bit risque and a bit, it can be a bit bloody at times. It's tinged with horror and schlock. But I would say that this is a great Warhammer Fantasy novel. Like Drachenfels, they would absolutely be amongst my most recommended Warhammer fiction at this point.
I agree. You often get people asking, is there anything that's not battle-based I used to enjoy Gotrek and Felix. Is there anything else like that? Well, this would be a great recommendation for people looking for that kind of story, because they're not going to find anything in it that like you mentioned, too risque or anything that goes beyond what you might encounter really in a Godric and Felix novel, or at least some of them. But it does feel like Warhammer, does feel like the Empire, and it's just loads of fun with at a good pace as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've done it. We've achieved our goal. We set out almost a year and a half ago to read the original 17 GW books in release order. At the time, it felt like, wow, that is a big commitment. That's a lot of reading. That's a lot of episodes of the GW Book Club. I mean, well, you know what? I think we will do a special episode, right? We'll go through the whole run. We'll talk about what our favorites were. I mean, we've just talked about what our favorites are now. But we're gonna do. You know what? We'll do a tier list. We'll do a tier ranking. We'll go through everything, and we're gonna rank them all out. What we think of each book for the original 17. I think that'd be really fun.
Great idea.
We'll do that as a separate video. But this is not the end, though, of the GW Book Club. Of course, we've recently done a few non-fiction episodes where we've looked at Warhammer Armies books, we've looked at Codex books, we did the Empire, we did Eldar, High Elves. We're going to be doing more of these. I think we'll probably be looking at some of the books that come out alongside the Old World and the armies that come there with that. I think we'll also find our way to some other classic non-fiction GW books. There's a few that are on my shelves that I think would make for great conversations. So we won't spoil what some of those are going to be, but those will be the non-fiction. On the fiction side, we're going to go in a slightly different direction. We are eventually going to get around to the box tree stuff and the remaining stories from the authors in the original GW stable, because I need to read the rest of the Kim Newman stories. I also sadly need to read the rest of the Conrad trilogy, because I can't not finish it.
Yeah,
we will be reading
same.
the Ian Watson stories and stuff like that. So we will get round to those, but we're going to pepper those in amongst other books, I think, aren't we? We're going to take a look at more recent Black Library stuff. We might get into some 40k stuff. Maybe we'll take a look at the Horus Heresy. That's been mooted as a potential thing for us to look at in some form. Probably not every book.
Not all of them, no.
No.
We've done 17 books, so let's do 56.
But I think we've decided that the first book we're gonna tackle from the Black Library stable is going to be Malekith by Gav.
Mm-hmm.
So something very different, much more. I was going to say much more modern. It's 20 years old and it's as well, but it's of the Black Library era. It is the sort of Time of Legend series. It's tackling, when we like in the High Elf Armies book, there's lots of amazing stories there about the Sundering and about this kind of epic mythology. So tackling a novel that explores that felt like a really fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Can't
we're
wait.
gonna. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Right, I think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to take a look at that very different approach to Warhammer fiction. We talked before about the difference between fantasy and fantasy role play and fantasy battle. That kind of feels like it would be, it would absolutely represent that distinction between what we've read and
yes, for sure,
yeah. And then I think we'll probably be open to maybe a few suggestions as well. If people have got some Black Library suggestions that they think, okay, that would be a really fun book to read, and we'll add it to our list.
Yeah, our big list.
A long list. But I enjoy reading these books and having these conversations too, and I think that they're just really good fun. So until we release those next episodes, Stu, where can people find you online?
Miniature Realms YouTube channel is the main one, but all the supporting social networks for it as well. Lots of different kind of stuff, more modeling, painting, and rules chatter for Warhammer stuff mostly, but lots of other things as well.
Good stuff. Yeah, and there'll be links to all of that in the description below, as well as your channel, your Patreon, all that good stuff. All of mine is down there as well. So I'm Jordan Sorcery on all of my social media, and I've obviously got Jordan Sorcery Pods, which is this channel, but the Jordan Sorcery main channel as well, where I do the documentaries about Warhammer history. I've got Patreon too. So go and check out all of our awesome links. There's fun stuff everywhere we go, I think it's fair to say. And you can also, of course, listen to our GW Book Club episodes as a podcast as well. So if you want to listen to us rather than look at us, that is possible. It is out there. You can literally just search for GW Book Club. But until next time, I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.